This is ILTV on the hour, bringing you the biggest stories from Israel and the Middle East. It's 2 p.m. Israel time and 7 a.m. in New York. I'm Ladar Lazi. Today is day 642 of the war in Gaza. Let's get into all the top headlines at this hour. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu held a second meeting in as many days. But the meeting lasted less than an hour. There were no public comments after the meeting and no signs of a breakthrough to reach a hostage ceasefire deal with Hamas. The Prime Minister's office confirmed that the main topic of discussion was efforts to reach a ceasefire. The possibility of a deal appeared to rise after the first meeting, and the second meeting added to the speculation as Trump, Netanyahu, and Vice President Vance were meeting in the Oval Office. Netanyahu confirmed that the second meeting focused on efforts to reach a hostage deal. The Prime Minister said, "We focused on efforts to free our hostages." This is what he had to say.
There are opportunities for peace that we intend to realize. We're working together on this. We have still to finish the job in Gaza, release all our hostages, eliminate and destroy Hamas's military and governance capabilities, because Gaza must have a different future for our sake, for everyone's sake. And no country will settle for less. We certainly will not. These are all things that I discussed with President Trump.
Meanwhile, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff has reportedly decided to push back his flight to Doha to join proximity talks between Israel and Hamas. Witkoff was expected to fly to Qatar yesterday, and a new departure date has yet to be scheduled. Witkoff says that he plans to travel to Doha in order to help bring the deal over the finish line. But as we said, the departure date has not been determined. Reports from Doha indicate that the fifth round of proximity talks ended last night without significant progress. And following the first Netanyahu-Trump meeting on Monday night, Israeli officials said negotiations on a hostage release had settled most issues, but the core issue of bringing the war to an end remains unresolved. And so joining us now with the latest on the ceasefire negotiations and the war in Gaza is ILTV military correspondent David Maitlin. David, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Adar.
So, David, there was no announcement out of the White House summit, and now Steve Witkoff is delaying his flight. What can you tell us? Have the negotiations once again stalled?
Look, it's certainly a significant indicator where Steve Witkoff is at any time in this process here. And I'll tell you, stay tuned for real breakthroughs in this or indicators of this when, in fact, Special Envoy Witkoff heads to Doha. And another character to keep in mind and pay attention to is the Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer. When he and Witkoff are involved at the table, it's time to start taking things much more seriously. It's an indicator that things may be closer to the finish line than they have been in a while. So, following a bit on the updates you gave already about how things went, from senior Israeli sources, they're using terms like we're in quote unquote total coordination, that we're really on the same page. Everyone's talking glowingly about where the U.S. and the Israeli administrations are on this issue. So that's one positive note. But for now, it appears that there are kind of four main pillars that I'd put this on right now in terms of where any kind of Gaza deal goes from here. First and foremost, it's on the future of Hamas. I mean, you hear Prime Minister Netanyahu himself talking about the complete elimination, total disarmament. Hamas is putting forward a different vision here of trying to stay in Gaza in some way, shape, or form. So that's one element to this. The other side is the IDF. Where are they going to withdraw to exactly under any kind of ceasefire agreement now? Those lines are apparently one of the main sources of contention. Some of the senior sources involved in these talks are even saying that the sides are 80 to 90% of the way there, that some of the main sticking points are in fact about where the ceasefire lines will be, where the IDF will withdraw to. There's the Morag corridor, which is now one that runs between Khan Yunis and Rafah in the south. There's the Netzarim corridor that runs east-west through the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and of course the Philadelphia route that blocks off the border with Egypt between Gaza. So these are all real points of contention, big questions around that. You also have the issue of the hostages. Clearly, that is a major point for Israel, and now the sort of who's on the list, who's not on the list. Is it a partial deal? Is it a complete deal for the hostages? That's hanging in the balance. Another element that came up sitting around the lunch table was really the only kind of press conference we got from Washington then was even Prime Minister Netanyahu himself talking about sort of voluntary emigration of Gazans. Where do the people of Gaza go from this point? In some of the areas uninhabitable, some of the areas still inhabited. So the big question there about where the people go. Is it going to be another move, another major effort, as we've heard President Trump talk about before, to have Gazans move elsewhere? We'll wait and see. But that seems to be where this ceasefire negotiation is stalled.
Mm-hmm. And, many were expecting an announcement of a deal from the White House, from the meetings. What's the mood like here in Israel now that there was no announcement and that it's, sort of still hanging in the balance?
It's such a gut-wrenching issue, and one in such a small country with such a high percentage of involvement, you could say, in the war front, whether it be in the IDF reserves, whether it be people who are connected to the families and the hostages. Everyone's obviously very invested in what's happening here. And so the really ups and downs of how this has gone have been brutal on the Israeli psyche, the Israeli public. There were a lot of high hopes here, with the president inviting Prime Minister Netanyahu again to Washington here, expecting a big breakthrough, expecting a big announcement. I think there's been a sense of deflation a bit here, disappointment that there wasn't yet any kind of big breakthrough or announcement. At the same time, so many people grounded in the realities, as I mentioned here, there's an understanding that these are really complex issues that, quite honestly, no one in any of this sort of coffee shop chatter even can kind of bridge the gaps that seem to be so apparent in this arrangement between Hamas and Israel. We'll stay tuned.
And, despite the meetings that are ongoing, the negotiations that are ongoing, what can you tell us is happening right now on the ground inside Gaza? Are the IDF operations continuing, and to what extent?
So at the same time, while this is such a huge headline story of all this diplomacy happening, we've got a massive IDF operation underway in the Gaza Strip that's moving forward steadily, day, night. We've got 5 IDF divisions right now that comes out to tens of thousands of troops. It's armored divisions, artillery, many aerial assets, infantry, engineering corps. So you have a full weight and might of the IDF is truly deployed across various parts of the Gaza Strip, from north to south. And that operation is continuing, as far as we can tell, as if there is no diplomacy going on. There's a full push right now to go after Hamas. In light of the casualties that the IDF took just in the last couple of days, which were a really tough blow, it doesn't slow down any of the operations. Now, the IDF in their daily briefing, even after following up yesterday, said that over 100 targets had been taken out across the Gaza Strip. We're talking about infrastructure, explosive stashes, tunnels, various command and control positions that they're finding in there. And it's still really an intelligence-driven campaign by the IDF. So taking out, with a lot of airstrikes, forces on the ground, really combined arms, moving in towards all the remaining Hamas positions. So this is still moving forward, full steam ahead as far as we can tell. It seems to be Israel keeping both options on the table and viable and moving forward at this point. The military track and option, and the diplomacy as alive as ever as well.
All right. Thank you, David, for the reports, for the updates. Thanks for joining us. And now I want to bring in the head of NGO Monitor, Dr. Gerald Steinberg. Dr. Steinberg, are you with us? Can you hear us? It seems we cannot hear Dr. Steinberg, so we will try and connect with him and reconnect with him, I should say, in a few moments. In the meantime, we'll move on to our next headlines. So yesterday, a new report released by the Dina Project is documenting sexual assault that took place on October 7th by Hamas. The report details sexual violence as a weapon of war on October 7th and allegations against Hamas terrorists who attacked Israeli communities. The Bar-Ilan University report offers a legal blueprint for potential prosecutions. The report cites at least 17 witnesses to at least 15 separate cases of sexual assault, including gang rape and mutilation of sexual organs. Several hostages released from Hamas captivity said they witnessed and experienced acts of sexual assault by their captors. Let's listen to one harrowing account.
בשבת השביעי באוקטובר הייתי בבית שלי בקיבוץ נירוס עם בן זוגי שלי מתן. בפתאום רעש, פיצוצים, צרחות והדלת נפרצת. חטפו אותנו. אני סוחרת שמכוונים עליי נשק. אני סוחרת ידיים שלא שייכות לי נוגעות בי. אני סוחרת שצעקתי ואז חושך. כשהתעוררתי, הייתי חצי ערומה, מוקפת במחבלים. הם הרביצו לי, הם נוגעים בי. לא ידעתי מה קרה לגוף שלי בדקות אבודות האלה. אבל הנשמה שלי כבר ידעה. שום דבר לא יהיה אותו הדבר.
Joining us now with more on the issue of sexual violence by Hamas on October 7th and beyond is Orit Sulitzeanu, CEO of the Association of Rape Crisis Centers in Israel. Orit, thanks for joining us. You know, this new report by the Dina Project came out yesterday. What is the significance of this report in perhaps getting some measure of justice for the rape victims?
First of all, it's a very important report, and actually, we, the Association of Rape Crisis Centers in Israel, last year, in the end of February, released the first report in the world about sexual violence that took place. And what is very good and important about the second report of our friends from the Dina Project, that they succeeded to really do research and have specific witnesses to specific cases, so they could count and not have an overlap of cases. And this is very important to sort of try to understand the scale. I'm sure that from the gap of the time when we did our first report till this time, 1.5 years passed, more information came out, and I'm sure that later on we will even learn more. And this is so important because, you know, when I and my colleagues, we go out to the world to talk about the sexual violence that took place, there's still a huge disbelief. You know, people do not want to hear this kind of information. Some people think that Israel is trying to give out this information in order to give excuses about what the Israeli army is doing in Gaza. But this report gives very concrete information. And as we did last 1.5 years ago, we tried to analyze what were the practices of the Hamas of sexual violence, what things happened again and again and again, and this proves systematic systematic abuse, sorry. And now in the Dina report, more information have come out, and it's another stronger proof that the sexual violence was systematic, planned, and not some kind of one person that did one thing, but many horrible terrorists that use sexual violence to terrorize civilians, to terrorize the Israeli people. Concerning the legal cases, this is less my expertise. The only question that we ask ourselves all the time in the Association of Rape Crisis Centers, that even if there is a legal construction to put people and to charge the terrorists, up till now, what we saw all the time, that the terrorists in the end were released. Horrible terrorists that did horrible things were released in all of these hostage deals. And I think everybody, all the Israelis, or most of the Israelis, first of all, wants to see our people back, no matter how many, it's very hard to say that, no matter how many people we have to release. So I do not know how this legal construction will be practical. I hope it will, but still, it's very important to have this kind of information come out, and it's us in the Association of the Rape Crisis Centers, our colleagues in the Dina Project, that do the work that actually a government should have done, but does not do it. So we give this information to the world and help to tell the sad and horrible narrative of what happened to us.
And so, you know, I've said it once and I'll say it again and I'll say it again. You know, where are all the international so-called feminist organizations, the so-called human rights organizations? Do you think that this report now, and as you mentioned, you've already released a report over a year ago, but do you think this report now will perhaps cause them to finally acknowledge the mass rape on October 7th?
This is a very hard question for me to answer. I do want that some people who see themselves as educated, you know, we heard about progressive feminists who, you know, said horrible things, but I think it's more of an ideological agenda. If you do not want to believe, you will get all the facts and you will not believe. And like, when one man abuses one woman, it's a he said, she said story, story. And so people who don't want to believe rape exists, don't believe the victim. So now Israel is the she said, and the world, some people in the world, some countries, some activists say, no, they are the he said. So I'm sad to say that I'm not so optimistic. I think still that people who do not want to believe because ideological reasons, no matter what data they will get, they will not believe. But I do hope that for others, this is more concrete data, more concrete information, and it will help people who want to listen, really listen and believe that we suffer this horrific tragedy that I hope no country and no person in the world will suffer again.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you've accompanied some of the survivors of rape on October 7th. I mean, maybe you can share with us, tell us a little bit about the process of rehabilitation after such a horrific ordeal.
So again, we never give this kind of information. Who do we talk and who our 9 rape crisis centers that are all over the country and get over 56,000 calls every year. The specific information, of course, I cannot tell. I can only say that, and this is a very severe trauma. It's horrific trauma, but actually, and this is something that happened nationally, but does not happen in our organizations, because nationally, what happened in the past 2 years, you saw that many Knesset members, some, not many, some Knesset members raised a lot of Knesset discussions and Knesset sessions about the sexual violence that took place on October 7th. But they raised it especially because of nationalistic reasons and less talked about the survivors. And we do not see any difference, and we do not see any hierarchy between a person, a woman or a man who are abused in the family or abused because somebody attacked them, and between people who are abused in this horrific scenario that happened in the war. Violence and sexual violence is horrific. And rehabilitation is really very personal. Some people have strong maybe relationships, family, friends, means to rehabilitate themselves. Other people that have many other traumas from the past, even sexual traumas from the past, it's harder for them. You always have to be optimistic, but it's not easy. All of us saw how the hostages returned back. We all saw the photographs of the hostages. We heard them talking on TV, and maybe in the hostage square, we see the trauma in their eyes. They suffered from so many trauma. Some of them suffered from sexual trauma. All of them saw death around them. It's very hard, and it takes time. And the country, and this is my big message, our government has to see this in the long-term rehabilitation. And I'm very sad to see some hostages, and I understand that, of course, do crowd fundraising because they need money to live. And I would expect from our government to take care from A to Z, from everything they need for their rehabilitation, so they will not need to do all kind of fundraising. But unfortunately, it's not what happens.
All right, so we seem to be losing you, but you did bring up an excellent point that in terms of the hostages as well, we know there are still 50 hostages held in Gaza, 20 of them still alive, and we can only imagine the horrific conditions that they're being held in and the daily torture that they are enduring. Orit Sulitzeanu, thank you so much for joining us today and for discussing this very, very important issue. And I want to see if we can circle back to Dr. Gerald Steinberg. Dr. Steinberg, can you hear me? Are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay.
Wonderful. So, okay. So great that we got the sound figured out. So, I want to circle back
Yes.
now to the meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I just want to hear, maybe first of all, your first impressions from this summit, the first meeting, second meeting that took place between the two leaders.
The fact that there were two meetings is itself significant. Obviously, the issues are very complicated. We heard that earlier in the program, and it's not at all clear. We have no real evidence as to what happened. There was no announcement. I think that President Trump certainly would have liked to have an announcement of a ceasefire agreement, but let's remember who was not at the meeting. Hamas was not at the meeting. Qatar was not at the meeting, and without them agreeing to some sort of a framework that will allow the hostages to be released and then perhaps ending the war, then we're not going to have an agreement. So it may be that there were other issues that were discussed that we don't know about. Perhaps certainly Iran was discussed, maybe also Lebanon and Hezbollah, but also what are the options for really pressing? It's possible that Prime Minister Netanyahu likely said to President Trump, look, the only way we're going to get a deal in Gaza is if Qatar starts to roll up its sleeves and plays a major role in forcing Hamas to reach conditions that are acceptable to Israel. That has not happened now, 640 days or so. Qatar is a key player, and they've basically gotten away without having to put up their own issues, their own role in this, and squeeze. They're the only source of pressure on Hamas. And they've been allowed to get away scot-free until now. So that may have been an important part of the discussion. We just don't know.
Mm-hmm. And from what we can tell, and from what we've seen coming out of these meetings, are the president and prime minister still on the same page when it comes to the major issues in the Middle East, with regards to the Islamic Republic of Iran, with regards to the war in Gaza, and even with regards to the Abraham Accords?
We don't have any indication of major differences right now. That could change. And let's remember that President Trump, first of all, he's an actor. And for him, politics is a theater. It's a stage. And he changes his mood. He changes his language. He can be very angry or feign anger at Israel, at Netanyahu, as we saw on the last day of the war with Iran. And then immediately afterwards, we're best friends. We coordinate carefully. We're on the same page. So I'm very cautious about trying to read too much into the script. It's not a script in the sense that it's not pre-written. It's something ad-libbed. He makes it up as he goes along. I think it's quite clear what Prime Minister Netanyahu seeks out of these meetings, and that is American backing, American pressure. And here again, the package is on the table. It's not just about Gaza. It's also about Iran. It's also about Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's also about Yemen. There's still missiles being fired from Yemen at Israel every few days. It's also about Syria. There's another agenda there, talk about a peace agreement with Syria of some kind, and the Americans are playing a major role in that as well. All these things are on the table, and they could all likely be discussed. They also are not separable. You mentioned the Abraham Accords. Well, if Syria comes into the Abraham Accords framework, something that was absolutely unimaginable a year ago, that will make a big difference. Will it also pave the way for the Saudis to be involved? The big goal here is not just to get the hostages back, which is very important, of course, but also to change the way the Middle East has been handled for the last 77 years. Since the 1948 war, Palestinians have set the tone. The Palestinian terrorism, the support for Palestinian rejectionism, for incitement that's gone on continuously since 1948. Another issue on the table is the whole issue of international aid, the removal of UNRWA, the big fight to maintain what's called the GHF, the Federation, or the foundation, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that was set up in order to replace UNRWA and the corrupt NGO process of aid for the Palestinians, which was a major part of Hamas's terror framework. And that's one of the reasons Hamas insists that the GHF be closed down and that UNRWA be returned. Well, Netanyahu and the Israelis have no interest in allowing that process to return to the way it was back before October 7th, 2023. So these are all important issues. And you say, well, they've had two meetings, which is very unusual when a foreign leader goes to the White House. So they have to talk about it, and there'll probably be a lot more coming up. We're not at the end of the story by any means.
Though certainly many here in Israel were expecting some kind of announcement, perhaps on a ceasefire deal, return of the hostages, or even, some analysts predicted that there would be some kind of major announcement with regards to the Abraham Accords with Syria, Israel, even perhaps the elusive normalization with Saudi Arabia. Do you think, though, sort of in taking a step back, looking at all of these issues, that Prime Minister Netanyahu sort of is walking away from the White House meeting satisfied? Did he sort of gain what he wanted to gain from this meeting?
I think that a lot of the speculation was really, a little bit maybe strong term, was irresponsible, because people were projecting their hopes, they're sort of reading their tea leaves without any real evidence. It was not at all clear why President Trump invited our Prime Minister, or why Netanyahu went to the White House this week. It hasn't been that long since he was there last time. There were clearly important issues on the table. That's why a lot of speculation about Gaza. Trump talked a lot about reaching an agreement. He said it was imperative. He said, we've got most of the pieces in place. But in fact, in all negotiations, especially when you're dealing with a terrorist group like Hamas, there is nothing agreed until everything's agreed. That's what we used to always teach our students. Until all the pieces are in place, there's no agreement. And I think that's where we are now. We're discussing, I think, or at least we're likely to have seen in the White House, discussions about all of these complex issues, and probably some sort of a plan, a joint coordinated plan to go forward. It's disappointing that that has not reached fruition now, but in fact, given what Hamas is doing, which is, since it's now 21 months, since that terrible day of October 7th, they've held 50 hostages, 20 of them we think are still alive, in the most cruel, inhumane conditions. We just had that report which really verified what was already well known, but ignored by what was called the human rights community, of the terrible violence, the sexual violence that took place on October 7th. This is all part of the package. How do we make sure that does not return, that Hamas cannot rebuild, and that support framework is not able to get into place? That's complicated. And I think that's what Netanyahu and Trump and their teams, let's not forget Ron Dermer, American ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, they were all involved in this. So it suggests to me this is not just two leaders trying to reach some sort of a quick agreement. I think it's much more basic and much more fundamental. The changes that have to take place need to be long lasting and not quick agreement and then back to the old disasters that we had before.
Absolutely. Well, Professor Gerald Steinberg, thank you so much for your analysis today.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on ILTV On the Hour, live from Israel and the Middle East every hour on the hour. The only English news delivering live updates around the clock. Stay with us for more updates as developments unfold. I'm Ladar Lazi. Thanks for watching.